Hello my friends. Today we're going to make jerky, and the jerky that we're going to make is going to be from beef, and I found this Black Angus, and this was at Aldi's, and they're selling this meat. It says great for fajitas, and what was really nice is these slices have minimal amount of fat other than what's on the end. We're going to cut the fat off, and it's sliced very thin, so it's sliced about the proper thickness. It's almost a 1/4 inch, maybe like 3/16 to a 1/4 inch thick. Now normally I cut my own, but finding this made it a lot easier. If you want to make jerky out of a roast, what you want to do is kind of par freeze it. Put it in the freezer till it gets stiff. Makes it real easy to cut then. Usually I make jerky out of venison, but in a pinch I'll do the beef, and the method that I do makes it taste really good. And I'm going to spice it up a little bit. Okay, you could dry pieces this size. The Native Americans, when they dried it, they would, as long as they had it cut thin, they would just put it out on their racks and sun dry it. This takes a lot of the work away from what you would normally have to do with the slicing. So I'm going to trim this fat off now. Minimal fat makes the storage of meats a lot longer. And what I want to do is cut this into a size that's easy to munch on. I usually have this around to use as a snack. So this to me would be the ideal size for a slab of jerky. Now this of course is going to shrink as it dries. So as we cut these, I'm also cutting the tendon out. Okay, that is a little bit too wide, so we make it about 1 inch thick. The length, it doesn't matter. We can always break it if you want it after it dries, if you want it shorter. Okay, I have all the meat cut, and what the Native Americans used to do would be take a knife and they would sharpen from one side. Instead of having a double bevel, they would bevel one edge, so that when they would cut, they would take a whole muscle and they would make a cut along the bottom. Then they would roll that muscle and keep unrolling a real thin piece, where they could take one muscle and make one long thin piece of meat up to 12 foot long. And the reason they did that is they would have wooden racks that they would stretch this meat, string it between the poles and dry it that way. With this method here, the way that I would do it if I was going to do a lot of venison, I would take my oven rack, take all the racks out, set one rack at the highest level in there. Then I would poke a toothpick through the end of each piece and suspend that toothpick at the top of the rack and fill the entire rack up in the oven. Then I would set the oven at its lowest temperature, usually around 120 degrees, and I would take a wooden spoon, take the handle, and stick that in the door and close it and leave that small gap in the oven door. and that would allow moisture to escape. And with that low heat, I would dry it overnight, and it would dry a very large volume. With this, I have about 1.5 pounds of meat, and I'm going to dry this in my food dehydrator. And this will dry it in probably about 4 or so hours. I'll dry it. The drying time will depend on the type of dehydrator that you have. And what I'll do is I'll check it periodically, and when I get to where most of the moisture is gone, then it's ready to eat. Okay, now Native Americans didn't have spices, and they just dried the meat, and then they would use that dried meat, they would pound it into a powder to make it into a pemmican, or they would reconstitute it in a soup, or just eat it as a dried food, a trail food. But we have the luxury of having spices, and this method I'm kind of copying from the Korean bulgogi recipe. I'm not putting the greens in like the scallions or the larger slices. I want to use powder so that all this will stick to the meat and not flake off. One ingredient that I am going to use is brown sugar. So I'm using about a tablespoon per pound. So since we have 1.5 pounds, we're going to add that little extra in there. Then the moisture is going to come from soy sauce. I'm using the low sodium. It doesn't matter. I'm not adding salt. You don't need to have salt. How much am I using? Good question. I would say I probably put in 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup in there. And what I want to do is stir this and see if it gets everything wet. Now, whatever you add, there's no real set recipe, but I'm adding garlic powder. That much. If you want to know how much, I would be guessing I probably put in 1/2 teaspoon. This is, oh, I don't want to put that in, that's a ginger. Oh, you could, but what I wanted was onion powder and black pepper. And this will add a spice. That's probably also a 1/2 teaspoon in there. And what I'm going to do now is just start laying these pieces out. If they're folded in there, you need to unfold them and spread them out on the dehydrator rack. If you have some real small pieces, which I'm sure I have a few in here, what I found that you can do is lay them or touch them, make them overlap one of the other pieces, and when it dries they'll stick together so that you don't have these little crumbs just laying around. The last batch that I had probably 2 pounds that were dried, and my Mohawk friend that was over, he loved it so much that I sent him home with all of my dried jerky. So he went home pretty happy. And I just told him that, well, I'll just go make some more. So that's what we're up to. Here the dehydrator was left on for 6 hours. And perfectly dry. Here we have it. If kept dry, this is going to last a really long time, or keep a real long time. It won't last a long time because I'll eat it all. So, real good flavor. Real high concentrate food here. Well, thanks for watching, my friends. Bye-bye.